I was standing at my kitchen window, watching the morning sun spill across the garden, when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from my son, Mark. I answered, expecting a quick hello or maybe a question about the house, but instead I heard Mark's voice, unaware the call had connected, drift through the speaker, sharp and cold. He has to go to a nursing home. I don't care what he says. We'll sell the house, split the money, and finally take that China trip. My hand froze, the mug suddenly heavy, the warmth leaching from my fingers. I didn't say a word. I just listened, my heart pounding, as Mark's wife, Susan, chimed in, "He'll never know what hit him. We'll tell him it's for his own good." The call ended with laughter, the kind that stings more than any insult. I set the mug down, my hands trembling, and stared out at the garden I'd spent decades tending. The roses my late wife had planted, the old oak tree where Mark had played as a boy, the porch where family dinners had once stretched long into the night, all of it suddenly felt like a stage set for betrayal. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. I sat at the table, the silence in the house pressing in, and let the truth settle over me. The son I'd raised, the family I'd sacrificed for, saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be moved and a bank account to be emptied. I thought of the years spent working overtime, the dreams I'd set aside so Mark could go to college, the quiet pride I'd felt when Mark bought his first car, got his first job, started his own family. Now, all of it seemed to have led to this moment, a plan to push me out, to sell the house I'd built with my own hands, to erase me from the story. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat in the quiet, my mind already working. I called my lawyer Carter, a friend I'd trusted for years, and asked a single question: who really owns the house? Carter's answer was simple. You do, Richard. Your name is the only one on the deed. They can't sell it without your signature. I felt a spark of hope, a flicker of the old stubbornness that had carried me through every storm. Good, I said. Let's talk about options. That night, as Mark and Susan packed for their China trip, I packed my own bags, quietly, methodically, taking only what mattered. I left a note on the kitchen table. Enjoy your trip. I'll be gone when you return. I handed the keys to the real estate agent the next morning, the house already listed for a private sale. As I drove away, the garden fading in the rearview mirror, I felt a strange sense of peace. The real revenge, I realized, wasn't in shouting or fighting. It was in letting Mark and Susan discover, too late, that the house they thought was theirs was never theirs at all. The next move was mine, and for the first time in years, I was ready to play by my own rules. I spent the next few days moving through my own house like a ghost, packing only what I truly cared about. My late wife's photo albums, the old fishing rod Mark and I used to take to the lake, a few books, and the faded quilt my mother had made when I was a boy. I left the furniture, the television, even the fancy kitchen gadgets Susan had insisted on buying with my money. The house felt emptier with every box I carried out, but I felt lighter too, as if every step away from that place was a step toward reclaiming my dignity. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't answer Mark's texts about finalizing the paperwork, or Susan's emails about prepping the house for sale. I let them believe I was quietly giving up, that I'd accepted my fate as a burden to be shuffled off to a nursing home. In reality, I was meeting with Carter and the real estate agent, finalizing the sale to a young couple who dreamed of raising their children in a home filled with laughter, not schemes. I found a small apartment in a quiet town nearby, The kind of place where no one knew my name and the neighbors waved from their porches without asking questions. The first night in my new place, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant sound of children playing. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I felt free. I called Sarah, my sister, and told her everything. She laughed, a sound full of pride and relief. "You did the right thing, Richard. You finally stood up for yourself." I smiled, the weight of her words settling over me like a blessing. "It was time, Sarah. I couldn't let them take everything I'd built." She promised to visit soon, and I knew she meant it. Meanwhile, Mark and Susan were halfway around the world, posting photos from the Great Wall and the Forbidden City, their smiles wide, their captions full of hashtags about living their best life. I watched from afar, knowing that the real surprise was waiting for them at home. I made sure the sale closed while they were gone, the money wired directly to my new account, every detail handled with the kind of precision that comes from years of being underestimated. I left a note for the new owners, wishing them happiness and peace, and another for Mark and Susan, taped to the front door. "You wanted me gone. Now you have it. The house is sold. The money is mine. Enjoy your new life." I imagined their faces when they returned, the key fitting in the lock, but the house empty, the echo of their own laughter ringing hollow in the rooms they'd once taken for granted. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel angry. I felt vindicated. The real revenge wasn't in what I'd taken from them, but in what I'd left behind, a lesson in respect, a reminder that money, in the wrong hands, is the root of all evil, but in the right hands, it can buy freedom, dignity, and a second chance at happiness. As I watched the sun set over my new home, I knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I was finally living on my own terms. I spent the next week settling into my new life, the days passing in a gentle rhythm I hadn't known in years. I woke early, made coffee, and sat on the balcony as the sun rose over the quiet street. I read books I'd been meaning to finish, took long walks through the park, and even joined a local chess club, where no one cared about my last name or the size of my bank account. For the first time in decades, I felt like myself again. No longer a caretaker, a wallet, or a burden, but a man with his own story to write. I kept my phone on silent, letting the calls and texts from Mark and Susan pile up. I knew they were due back from China any day, and I could almost picture the scene, their jet-lagged smiles fading as they pulled into the driveway, their laughter dying as they realized the house was empty, the furniture gone, the echo of their own voices bouncing off bare walls. I imagined Mark fumbling with his key, the lock turning easily, only to find a note taped to the door. "You wanted me gone. Now you have it. The house is sold. The money is mine. Enjoy your new life." I wondered how long it would take for the shock to turn to anger, for the anger to turn to panic. I didn't have to wait long. The morning after their return, my phone lit up with a barrage of calls and messages. Mark's first voicemail was a mix of disbelief and fury. "Dad, what did you do? Where's all our stuff? Where are you?" Susan's was shriller, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of blame. "You can't do this. That house was supposed to be ours. You're ruining everything." I listened to each message, my heart steady, my resolve unbroken. I called Sarah, my sister, and told her what was happening. She laughed, her pride in me clear. "You finally taught them a lesson, Richard. Maybe now they'll understand what it means to earn something." I smiled, the weight of years of resentment lifting from my shoulders. I hope so, Sarah. I really do. As the day wore on, the calls grew more desperate. Mark begged me to call him back, to explain, to give him another chance. Susan threatened to sue, to call the police, to tell everyone what a terrible father I was. I let the phone ring, my silence louder than any argument. I spent the afternoon volunteering at the local library, helping kids with their homework, finding joy in the simple act of giving without expectation. That evening, I sat on the porch, the air cool and sweet, and watched the stars appear one by one. I thought of my wife, her laughter echoing in the quiet, her hand warm in mine. "You did the right thing, Richard," I imagined her saying. "You finally stood up for yourself." I raised a glass to the night, grateful for the peace I'd found, and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The real revenge, I realized, wasn't in Mark and Susan's suffering, but in my own freedom, the chance to live on my own terms, to choose my own happiness, and to remind my family that respect, once lost, must be earned back one day at a time. The day after Mark and Susan returned from China, the phone calls turned into something else entirely. I was sitting in my new apartment, a cup of tea in hand, when my phone began to ring again and again. First Mark, then Susan, then both at once, their numbers lighting up the screen like warning flares. I let it go to voicemail, knowing exactly what they were seeing: the empty house, the echoing rooms, the note on the door. I pictured Mark's face as he tried the key, expecting everything to be just as he'd left it, only to find the world he'd taken for granted had vanished. I imagined Susan's scream, sharp and furious, as she realized the bank account was empty, the credit cards declined, the safety net she'd always counted on gone without a trace. The neighbors told me later that the whole street heard them, Mark pounding on the door, Susan sobbing on the porch, their voices rising in disbelief and rage. "He can't do this. This was supposed to be ours." I could almost hear them from miles away, the sound of entitlement crashing into reality. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't reply to the texts. I let the silence do the talking. Instead, I spent the day walking through the park, the air crisp and full of the promise of autumn. I watched children play, couples stroll hand in hand, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I stopped at a cafe for lunch, the waitress smiling as she poured my coffee, unaware of the storm raging in another part of town. I called Sarah, my sister, and told her what was happening. She laughed, her voice full of pride. "You finally showed them, Richard. You finally put yourself first." I smiled, the weight of her words settling over me like a warm blanket. It was time, Sarah. I couldn't let them take everything I'd built. That evening, as the sun set and the city lights flickered on, I sat on my balcony and listened to the quiet. I thought of all the years I'd spent sacrificing for Mark, for Susan, for a family that had come to see me as a burden rather than a blessing. I thought of the nights I'd lain awake, wondering if I'd done enough, if I'd loved enough, if I'd given too much. Now, for the first time, I felt free. The house was gone, the money was mine, and the future was wide open. I poured myself a glass of wine, raised it to the stars, and whispered a silent thank you to my wife, whose memory had given me the strength to stand up for myself. The real revenge, I realized, wasn't in Mark and Susan's suffering, but in my own peace, the knowledge that I had finally reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my right to choose happiness on my own terms. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I was excited to see where it would lead. The days that followed were a strange mix of freedom and fallout. I woke each morning to sunlight streaming through the windows of my new apartment, the air quiet and clean, the only sound the distant hum of city life. I made coffee, read the paper, and took long walks through the park, savoring the feeling of being anonymous, of having no one to answer to but myself. But every afternoon, like clockwork, the calls would start again. Mark's number, then Susan's, then a string of texts that grew more desperate with each passing day. "Dad, please. We need to talk. You can't just disappear. We have nowhere to go. How could you do this to your own family?" I read each message, my heart heavy but my resolve unbroken. I knew they were hurting, but I also knew they had brought it on themselves. I called Sarah, my sister, and told her about the latest round of pleas and accusations. She listened, her voice calm and steady. "You did what you had to do, Richard. Sometimes the only way people learn is when they have to face the consequences of their own choices." I nodded, grateful for her support. "I just wish it didn't have to be this way." She sighed. "We all wish that. But you can't save people from themselves." As the days turned into weeks, the story of what happened spread through the family and the neighborhood. Some called me petty, others called me brave. Old friends reached out to congratulate me, their voices full of admiration. "You finally stood up for yourself, Richard. You finally put yourself first." I smiled, the weight of their words settling over me like a warm blanket. It was time. I couldn't let them take everything I'd built. I spent my days volunteering at the local library, helping kids with their homework, finding joy in the simple act of giving without expectation. I made new friends, joined a book club, and even started taking painting classes at the community center. For the first time in years, I felt alive. But the real test came when Mark showed up at my door, his face drawn, his eyes hollow. He stood in the hallway, his hands shaking, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know what Susan was planning. I just wanted to make things easier for everyone. I never meant to hurt you." I looked at him, my anger softened by the memory of the boy I'd raised, the son who had once looked up to me with trust and love. "You made your choices, Mark. Now you have to live with them. But I still love you. I always will." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I want to make things right. I want to earn back your trust." I hugged him, my own eyes wet. That's all I ever wanted. As he left, I realized that the real revenge wasn't in Mark and Susan's suffering, but in my own freedom, the chance to live on my own terms, to choose my own happiness, and to remind my family that respect, once lost, must be earned back one day at a time. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I was excited to see where it would lead. After Mark's visit, the silence between us stretched for days, but it was a different kind of quiet, one filled with the possibility of change, not just the ache of loss. I spent my mornings in the park, watching the world wake up, and my afternoons at the library, where the laughter of children and the gentle hum of conversation reminded me that life could be simple and good. I started painting in the evenings, losing myself in the colors and shapes, letting the act of creation heal wounds that words never could. But every night, as I sat on my balcony and watched the city lights flicker on, I thought of Mark and Susan, wondering if they were finally learning what it meant to stand on their own. One evening, as I was cleaning my brushes, my phone buzzed with a message from Susan. "Richard, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I was wrong. I let my fear and pride get in the way. We lost everything, but maybe that's what we needed." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I wanted to reply, to offer forgiveness, but I knew it wasn't that simple. Forgiveness, I'd learned, was a process, a choice you made every day, not just a word you said to make the pain go away. I called Sarah, needing her wisdom. She listened, her voice warm and steady. "You don't owe them anything, Richard. But you owe yourself peace. If you're ready to forgive, do it for you, not for them." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my bones. The next day, I wrote Susan a letter. I told her I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the anger that was eating me alive. I told her I hoped she and Mark would find their way, that they would learn to build something real, something earned. I mailed the letter and felt a weight lift from my shoulders. A week later, Mark called again, his voice steadier this time. "Dad, we're moving into a small apartment. I got a job at the hardware store. It's not much, but it's honest work. Susan's looking for something too. We're trying, Dad. We really are." I smiled, pride and relief mingling in my chest. "That's all I ever wanted, Mark. For you to stand on your own 2 feet." He laughed, the sound lighter than I'd heard in years. "Maybe we'll even invite you over for dinner sometime." I agreed, my heart full. The real revenge, I realized, was not in their suffering, but in their growth. The chance to see my son become a man, to watch Susan learn humility, to know that I had finally broken the cycle of entitlement and resentment. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I believed we were all finally learning what it meant to be a family. The next chapter would be about hope, about legacy, and about the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what storms might come. The first time Mark and Susan invited me to their new apartment, I hesitated at the door, unsure of what I'd find on the other side. Gone were the trappings of their old life, the sprawling house, the expensive furniture, the sense of entitlement that had once filled every room. Instead, I found a small, tidy space filled with the smell of home-cooked food and the sound of quiet laughter. Susan greeted me with a nervous smile, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "Welcome, Richard. We're glad you're here." Mark hugged me, his grip strong, his voice steady. "It's not much, Dad, but it's ours. We wanted you to see what we're building." I looked around, pride swelling in my chest. The table was set with mismatched plates, the meal simple but made with care. We sat together, sharing stories and memories, the old wounds now woven into the fabric of our lives, not as scars to be hidden, but as proof of survival. After dinner, Mark poured coffee and we sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. "I never realized how much I took for granted," he admitted, his voice low. "I thought money would solve everything. But it just made us greedy, made us forget what mattered." I nodded, my own regrets surfacing. "I let it happen, Mark. I wanted to give you everything, but I should have taught you to earn it." Susan joined us, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Richard. For everything. I was scared of losing what we had, but I see now that we never really had anything at all." I forgave her, not because she asked, but because I needed to. Forgiveness, I'd learned, was the only way to move forward. As the weeks passed, Our relationship grew stronger. Mark and Susan worked hard, saving every penny, learning to live within their means. They invited me over often, their gratitude genuine, their respect for me finally real. I found myself looking forward to our dinners, our walks in the park, the quiet moments of connection that had once seemed impossible. Sarah visited often, her laughter and wisdom a constant reminder that family was worth fighting for. The real revenge, I realized, was not in Mark and Susan's suffering, but in our healing, the chance to build something new from the ashes of the past. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I believed we were finally on the right path. The next chapter would be about hope, about legacy, and about the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what storms might come. As the months passed, the rhythm of our new lives settled into something that felt both unfamiliar and deeply right. Mark and Susan worked hard, their pride in their small apartment growing with every bill paid and every meal cooked from scratch. I visited often, sometimes bringing groceries or a homemade pie, but always respecting their independence. The old tension between us faded, replaced by a quiet gratitude that colored every conversation. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, Mark handed me a small envelope. "Dad, we've been saving. We want you to have this." Inside was a check, not much, but enough to show that they were serious about making amends. "We know it doesn't make up for everything," Susan said, her eyes shining with tears. "But it's a start." I smiled, my heart full. "It's not about the money. It's about the effort. I'm proud of you both." We talked late into the night, sharing stories of the past, dreams for the future, and the lessons we'd learned about love, respect, and the dangers of letting money come between us. The real surprise came when Emma, my granddaughter, announced she'd been accepted to college on a scholarship, one she'd earned through her own hard work, not family connections. The pride in her eyes was a gift greater than any inheritance. "I did it, Grandpa," she said, hugging me tight. "I did it on my own." I hugged her back, my own eyes wet. "That's all I ever wanted for you, Emma. To know your own worth." Sarah joined us for a celebratory dinner, her laughter filling the room, her wisdom guiding us through the last of the old wounds. "You see, Richard," she said, raising her glass, "money can be a blessing or a curse. But gratitude, forgiveness, and hard work, those are the real treasures." I nodded, the truth of her words settling deep in my bones. As the seasons changed and the city came alive with the colors of autumn, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined us. Instead, we chose to remember the lessons learned, that dignity is worth fighting for, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and that the truest legacy is the family you build, the lives you touch, and the courage to hope. The journey was almost over, but for the first time, I believed we were finally on the right path. The next chapter would be about passing on the lessons we'd learned, about teaching the next generation that respect is earned, not given, and that the greatest revenge is living well, loving deeply, and never letting anyone steal your peace. With autumn in full swing and the city glowing with the colors of change, I decided it was time to start a new tradition, one that would remind us all of what really mattered. I invited Mark, Susan, Emma, and Sarah to my apartment for a simple Sunday dinner. No gifts, no expectations, just a meal made with love and a table set for honest conversation. The air was crisp, the windows fogged with the warmth of the oven, and the kitchen filled with the scent of roasting chicken and fresh bread. Emma arrived first, her cheeks pink from the cold, her eyes bright with excitement about college. "Grandpa, I want to help with dinner," she said, rolling up her sleeves and diving into the work with a joy that made my heart swell. Mark and Susan came next, carrying a homemade pie and a bouquet of wildflowers. "We wanted to thank you, Dad," Mark said, his voice steady, "for everything. For giving us a second chance." I smiled, feeling the old wounds finally begin to heal. Sarah arrived last, her laughter filling the room as she hugged each of us in turn. "This is what family is supposed to feel like," she said, her eyes shining. As we sat down to eat, I raised my glass and looked around the table, my heart full. "I know we've all made mistakes," I began, my voice steady. "But we've also learned, grown, and forgiven. That's what matters. Let's promise to keep this tradition. One meal, once a month, where we put everything else aside and just be together." The family agreed, their voices echoing with hope and gratitude. After dinner, we sat in the living room, sharing stories and dreams for the future. Emma talked about her plans for college, her desire to help others, and the lessons she'd learned about resilience and self-worth. Mark and Susan spoke about their new life, the challenges they'd faced, and the pride they felt in building something real. Sarah, ever the wise mentor, reminded us that the greatest revenge was not in making others suffer, but in living well, loving deeply, and never letting money or pride come between us again. As the night wore on and the city lights twinkled outside, I realized that the real legacy I wanted to leave was not in land or money, but in the hearts of those I loved, their laughter, their forgiveness, and their courage to hope. The journey was almost over, but the promise of tomorrow was brighter than ever. The next chapter would be about passing on the lessons we'd learned, about teaching the next generation that respect is earned, not given, and that the truest wealth is found in the family you build and the peace you protect. The new tradition of Sunday dinners quickly became the heartbeat of our family, but it was the harvest dinner in late November that truly brought everything full circle. I spent the morning in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread and basting a chicken, the radio playing old jazz tunes that reminded me of my wife. The apartment was warm, the windows fogged with the promise of a feast, and the table set with mismatched plates and a centerpiece of wildflowers Emma had picked on her way over. Mark and Susan arrived first, their arms full of groceries and their faces relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. "We brought extra," Mark said, grinning, "just in case you want leftovers." Susan hugged me, her gratitude genuine. "Thank you for giving us another chance, Richard." I smiled, feeling the old wounds finally begin to heal. Emma and Sarah came next, their laughter filling the apartment as they helped set the table and finish the last of the cooking. "This is what family is supposed to feel like," Sarah said, her eyes shining. "Messy, loud, and full of love." As we sat down to eat, I looked around the table, my heart full. "I know we've all been through a lot," I began, my voice steady. "But we're here. We're together. And that's what matters." The meal was simple but perfect: roast chicken, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and a pie that Emma had made from scratch. We ate slowly, savoring every bite, every story, every laugh. After dinner, we gathered in the living room, the fire crackling, the city lights twinkling outside. Emma pulled out the family journal, now thick with entries from every member. "Let's add a new page," she said, her voice full of hope. Each of us wrote something: what we were grateful for, what we hoped for, what we promised to do better. When it was my turn, I wrote, I am proud of the family we have become. I am grateful for the peace we have found. I promise to keep this home a place of love, respect, and second chances." As the night wore on and the fire burned low, I realized that the greatest revenge was not in Mark and Susan's suffering, but in the family's survival, their ability to forgive, to rebuild, and to find joy in the aftermath of betrayal. The journey was almost over, but for the first time, I believed we were finally on the right path. The next chapter would be about legacy, about teaching the next generation that dignity is worth fighting for, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and that the truest wealth is found in the family you build and the peace you protect. Winter arrived with a hush, the city blanketed in snow, the world outside my apartment transformed into a landscape of white and silver. I woke early, the house quiet except for the gentle creak of old wood and the distant laughter of children playing in the street. I brewed coffee and sat by the window, watching the sun rise over the rooftops, the sky painted in soft gold and blue. The pain and chaos of the past seemed distant now, softened by the steady work of forgiveness and the warmth of family. As the holidays approached, Emma suggested we host a small gathering for the support group, inviting anyone who needed a place to belong. The apartment was soon filled with the scent of baking bread, the sound of music, and the laughter of friends old and new. Mark and Susan arrived early, their arms full of gifts and groceries, their faces relaxed and open. "We wanted to thank you, Dad," Mark said, his voice steady. "For everything. For giving us a second chance." Susan hugged me, her gratitude genuine. "You taught us what matters, Richard. You taught us how to be a family." I smiled, my heart full. We all learned together. As the evening wore on, we gathered in the living room, the fire crackling, the city lights twinkling outside. Emma read a passage from the family journal, her voice steady and clear. "We've learned that money can be a blessing or a curse, but love and gratitude are the real treasures. I'm grateful for every lesson, every mistake, and every second chance." The group listened, their faces shining with hope. After dinner, we exchanged small gifts, homemade cookies, handwritten notes, a scarf Sarah had knitted for Emma. The gifts were simple, but the meaning behind them was profound. "This is what family is supposed to feel like," Sarah said, her eyes shining. "Messy, loud, and full of love." As the night wore on and the fire burned low, I realized that the greatest revenge was not in Mark and Susan's suffering, but in the family's survival, their ability to forgive, to rebuild, and to find joy in the aftermath of betrayal. The journey was almost over, but for the first time, I believed we were finally on the right path. The next chapter would be about legacy, about teaching the next generation that dignity is worth fighting for, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and that the truest wealth is found in the family you build and the peace you protect. As I watched the snow fall outside, I whispered a silent promise to myself and to those I loved, "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The Grant legacy would endure, not just in land or money, but in the hearts of those who had learned to love, to forgive, and to begin again. The new year dawned with a sky of pale gold and the promise of a fresh start. The city outside my window hushed beneath a blanket of snow. I woke to the gentle sounds of life in my apartment. Emma humming in the kitchen, Mark and Susan laughing as they made breakfast, Sarah reading the paper by the fire. The pain and chaos of the past seemed distant now, softened by the steady work of forgiveness and the quiet strength of boundaries finally respected. After breakfast, we bundled up and walked to the park, the world transformed into a wonderland of white. The children raced ahead, their laughter echoing through the trees, while the adults strolled behind, sharing stories and dreams for the future. I watched Emma and Sarah walk arm in arm, their bond stronger than ever, and felt a peace settle over me that I hadn't known in years. When we returned home, we gathered in the living room, the family journal at the center of the table. Each of us added a new entry: hopes for the year, promises to ourselves and each other, confessions of fear and gratitude. I wrote simply, "I am proud of the family we have become. I am grateful for the peace we have found. I promise to keep this home a place of love, respect, and second chances." The children buried the box beneath the old oak, their laughter ringing out as they chased each other through the snow. The day unfolded in a blur of work and joy, meals to cook, stories to share, games to play. As the sun set and the sky turned lavender and blue, we gathered by the fire, the room aglow with the light of the tree and the warmth of family. Emma raised her glass, her eyes shining. "To Dad, for teaching us that the greatest revenge is living well, loving deeply, and never letting anyone steal your peace." The toast was echoed around the room, the promise of tomorrow bright in every face. I sat back in my old chair, Sarah beside me, the children at my feet, and felt a peace deeper than any I had ever known. The journey had been long and hard, but in the end, it had led us all home. The legacy I left was not in land or money, but in the hearts of those who had learned to forgive, to hope, and to begin again. As the fire burned low and the world outside grew quiet, I closed my eyes, grateful for the journey, and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that, at last, the Grant legacy would endure for generations to come. The real revenge was never about making others suffer, but about building a life worth living, one day at a time, and teaching those you love that the greatest wealth is found in the hearts you heal and the hope you inspire.